Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, and I direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Courtney Maum's new novel, Costalegre, I'd like to share a bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Astor Place to Union Square, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, authors like Courtney and Julie, we wouldn't be here today, and we are just so very appreciative of it. Tonight, we are excited to have with us Courtney Maum to celebrate the paperback release of her novel, Costalegre. Courtney is the author of the novels Touch, and I am having so much fun here without you, the chapbook Notes from Mexico, and the handbook Before and After the Book Deal, a writer's guide to finishing, publishing, promoting, and surviving your first book. Her writing and essays have been widely published in such outlets as BuzzFeed, the New York Times, the Oprah Magazine, and Modern Loss. She is the founder of the Learning Collaborative, The Cabins, and she also works as a product and cosmetic shade namer from her home in Connecticut. Joining Courtney in conversation is novelist Julie Orringer. Julie is the author of 2 award-winning books, The Invisible Bridge, a New York Times bestselling novel, and How to Breathe Underwater, a collection of stories. Her new novel, The Flight Portfolio, tells the story of Varian Fry, the New York journalist who went to Marseille in 1940 to save writers and artists blacklisted by the Gestapo. All of her work has been published by Knopf, and her books have been translated into 20 languages. Her stories have appeared in numerous anthologies, including the Granta Book of the American Short Story and the Scribner Anthology of American Short Fiction. She is the winner of the Paris Review's Plimpton Prize and has received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Cullman Center at the New York Public Library, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, the MacDowell Colony, and Yaddo. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and children and is at work at a novel set in New Orleans. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Julie and Courtney to the stage.
Welcome to the stage. Hi, thank you so much for having us. We're all here, right? Julie, Sabir, the Strand. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. I love the Strand. It was I haven't lived in New York City in a long time, but whenever I was there, the Strand and just hanging around Union Square was kind of my thing. So really excited to be here with you all tonight.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement on that, Courtney. I remember when I was in college at Cornell, we would come down sometimes for weekends to the city, and the Strand was like the coolest place you could possibly be. You know,
absolutely.
Like ground
the coolest
zero
people,
of literary coolness in New York.
The coolest bookstore, like
right.
the people that worked there were always just had like cutting edge haircuts and the best. Even their tote bags were the best, and they still are.
And if you could muster the cool to actually talk to one of the staff people, they would always have the best recommendations for you. I knew that I was going to come away with something that I didn't expect, and that surprised and delighted me. So it's really exciting to be celebrating your book at the virtual Strand, and I can't wait to get back to the real Strand.
Yeah, nor can I.
So do you want to start, Courtney, by describing the novel a little bit, and then I'll do the same, and we'll talk about how this conversation came into being?
I would love to do that. I would actually love, if you don't mind, if you went first, simply because in terms of chronology, your book, which is awesome, comes out before mine, right? Do you mind starting?
I don't mind. My novel, The Flight Portfolio, is about Varian Fry, a New York journalist who went to Marseille in 1940 to save writers and artists who had been blacklisted by the Gestapo. He was a real person. He had no experience doing any kind of refugee work, life-saving work, undercover work, which is largely what his mission became. And yet he felt so strongly about the importance of making sure that the artists who had been blacklisted by the Nazis made it to the States, that he took it upon himself to spearhead this work on the ground in Europe. And so the novel follows his real experiences and details his relationships with people like Max Ernst and Marc Chagall, Andre Breton, and talks about their experiences living in a villa outside Marseille in, you know, the fall of 1940 to the summer of 1941. And it also tells a parallel story about a lover of his from college who reappears after a long absence in Marseille, trying to save his current lover's son, a prominent young physicist who has disappeared and who he's trying to find. And so those are the kind of twin storylines in the book. One is factual, the other is fictional, and they run together in what I hope is a sort of historically braided way.
So then my book, Costalegre, picks up where yours sort of leaves off. Oh, I'm sorry, we're being attacked by a seagull. Oh God. Okay. Actual physical attack by a seagull, but we're moving on. Anyway.
Which amazingly mirrors a scene in your book.
It does. I'm sorry. I'm actually, it's a very large, it's like the size of a small donkey. Anyway, this is the new normal, right? I'm just going to work through this. So my book reimagines the flight of the people that are on the kind of flight list. And it's funny, it feels like we're both the directors who have worked with the same actors, because so many of the actual artists who are in your book are fictionalized in mine. So Peggy Guggenheim, art collector. Oh, I see, he's stealing our chicken. He's stealing chicken. Okay. It's a barbecue.
Do you need to let your husband know? I can totally...
He's winking at me.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, it's just very, you know, good job. You got to do what you know, feed yourself during the pandemic.
This is the thing that people are going to remember about the conversation.
I know. Sorry, I can't lie about what, you know. So Peggy Guggenheim, she funded, so Varian Fry is involved in the Emergency Rescue Committee. She funded some of it basically to get the artist whose work she collected out of Europe. So my book reimagines the sort of A-listers that Peggy Guggenheim helped get out of Europe. And instead of shepherding them all to New York, where they actually would have gone, and I'm speaking about Andre Breton, Max Ernst, who at that point was actually her husband. She married him to help get him out. Instead, this group, and there's 9 adult artists in my book, they wait out the war in the jungle in Western Mexico. And the whole book is told from the point of view of a fictionalized Pegeen Guggenheim, her daughter, when she's 15 years old, and it's written as a diary. So you get kind of the play-by-play of this young woman, the only young person. She has nothing with her but a diary, and then she's hunkering down, you know, in isolation, actually quarantining with basically the world's, you know, the creme de la creme of artists. So yeah.
And they're doing this on the cusp of the war, right? The book takes place in 1937.
Yeah, I fudged the dates a little. I mean, I took a lot of liberties. It's heavily based on fact, but it's also heavily fictionalized. And I fudged the dates because I wanted her to be a teenager. You know, I was just completely stuck on that. That's what mattered to me the most, that she would have been a teenager. So it takes place about several years earlier than it should, which my husband tells me people are not shy to leave in my Amazon reviews. I don't read them, but I'm sorry, I use my artistic license. But yeah, so that's what I'm just so honored that you spoke to me today, because it's so cool to speak to another author about, we were so interested in the same people, and we went for it, and you know, we've come up with 2 different books, but they're still in conversation with each other, and I love that.
Your paperback is so beautiful. I'm going to show your hardcover just because.
Oh, thank you.
The tiger may come into our
Tiger.
discussion at some point.
Yes, I hope so.
But I love the black and white photo that's on the paperback too. Is that Pegeen in the photo?
It is definitely not Pegeen.
Okay.
She wasn't much of a horseback rider. Actually, the ankle problems sort of ran in the family, and
I see.
she was very sickly. Her mother sort of encouraged anorexia, so not really a family of athletes. But we felt that with the Tin House team that this photo nevertheless evoked the mood.
It was suggestive of, yeah, that's
suggestive of, exactly.
So I want to start by talking about a fascination with Mexico and Costalegre itself. What was the impetus, either in fiction or in your life, for getting these writers and visual artists out of Europe before the start of the war and placing them in that particular place, in that particular setting? What was it that was so compelling about it? What was it that was suggestive of narrative about Costalegre itself?
Well, I could answer I'll probably answer this for the rest of my life, because it's a place called Correas that inspires me so much that at this point, I think I have 2 personal essays, 2 short stories, and a chapbook, and now a novel, all based in this place. But if it's okay with you, I actually have a show and tell to share about the area, which I thought would help people.
Oh, that's great.
Is that all right?
That's
all right,
amazing.
let's
Yeah,
see.
that's a perfect way to get into that.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Everyone bear with me. Okay, please work. I think it's going to work. Okay, click. Are you seeing my mood board?
Yes. Yes.
I love me a mood board. So there's closer up photos, but this is just a general. We have Pegeen in the middle. There's a little bit of a Max Ernst painting that comes up in the book. But so this is a picture from when I was researching the book. This is in Western Mexico in the state of Jalisco. And my little daughter there was about 4 at this point. And this is where I was researching the book, and I ended up being stuck in this beautiful place because I was on book tour in March when COVID hit. So that's it's a picture of when I was researching. This house that I'm about to show you, can you see my clicker thing, my little arrow? Maybe not. Anyway,
yeah, we can
you
see it.
can? Oh, cool. So
Yeah.
it's around here, this house. It was directly across from the house that I was staying in, which belongs to a family friend.
And is that the ocean far in the distance?
That's the ocean. That's the ocean.
Okay.
So this is the house where my fictionalized Pegeen, who's named Lara in the book, is waiting out the war. And this house, this is her bedroom with the eye. And in the book, it becomes a kind of a repetitive thing. She's really upset because her bedroom has no door and her window has no shades. And she feels like she never has privacy. But the structure actually helped me write the book, because I've been into this house, I've been in this bedroom, and you can see pretty much every other room. The vantage point allowed me to write the diary as if she truly was spying on everyone. So if you look at this is the rest of the house. So there's a studio here where the Salvador Dali character named Baldomero Zayas is supposed to be working. Everyone kind of has their own little studio. And then her bedroom with the eye is here. So from the back and the front of this tower, she can sort of spy on everyone.
Which is so amazing, because it's not only that she's spying on everyone, it's that she feels observed by everyone. So
which she is.
So
yeah,
like the eye works in both directions.
That's exactly right. I should have said she can be viewed and also view. So the reason I chose this house, aside from it just being flabbergastingly cool, is this is the Tiopa Beach, which exists, and it's an important character in the book. But the currents here are super, super dangerous. You cannot swim in the ocean there. There's been quite a few deaths. And of course, there's no like protective railings, right? Like there is in America. This is Mexico. They're less litigious. And the reason I wanted to be very close to this dangerous ocean is because Peggy Guggenheim, her father, actually went down on the Titanic. And so for her entire life, she was both fascinated with the sea and sort of obsessed with it, and also very scared. And she was always renting out houses that were near the ocean, and that I knew that, and I'd been gravitating toward studying a book in this place for a long time. So this was sort of one reason I wanted to do it. Another reason is that this place, Courtney, is the most surrealist place I've ever been. There's all these structures built around the landscape that are, you know, odd. This is called La Copa, and it's meant to be a bowl, an offering to the gods. It's absolutely massive. Here's the approach to it. And, you know, from the, I guess you can't see it up here, but it's on the other end of this beach. So it's something you can view from this house. And I'm not ready for that one yet. So aside from the sort of surrealist architecture, the super dangerous currents, this is also a really, I mean, although it's developed in a certain sense, because there all are kind of these amazing ocean castles, not right on top of each other. There'll be like one every, I don't know, 2 miles or something. It remains really rustic. Rustic's not really I mean, a little frightening. I've been there now maybe 6 times, and there's massive serpents, there's crocodiles, there's horses, there's wild horses, there's tarantulas, there's scorpions out the wazoo. And even though this is a property, very expensive property, very wealthy people, you know, rent this property, there really aren't nothing can keep the nature out. And I really wanted that kind of ambience. And when I was thinking about, okay, I mean, I know how to read history books. I know that they weren't in Western Mexico at this time. I just couldn't imagine setting this in New York, because I was writing about surrealists, you know, and I thought, and also during a really surreal time. The war has not yet broken out. They're waiting for news of it. And I found myself thinking a lot about the way it felt before the election, and how, what a weird time that was, and how and even now is a weird time, you know, when we look back. Hopefully we'll be able to look back when there's a vaccine and everything. And I don't think anyone's sense of place and time, it's all fuzzy. Where New York to me is very fast moving. We know where we are, even if you think about the crossroads, and it's hard to get lost. I mean, you can manage it. I've managed it, but this is what I wanted: danger, dangerous water, dangerous currents, vipers, poisonous snakes and insects. And then finally I slipped in just to give people an idea of the kind of artists that are in this book with Lara. This is an image of a World War I artist named Paul Nash, who really inspired me. He's part of there's a major character called Jack, who, it's a little confusing if he's a love interest or a mentor or a friend to Lara. He's much older, but he's partly based on Constantine Brancusi and partly based on Paul Nash, who was a World War I art. He was sent to the front lines by England to paint the war effort, and his paintings came back so terrifying that the government actually said to him, okay, go back out. You can't, no livestock can be shown dead, and no dead bodies, please. And so he developed this, this is 1919, this painting. And so he started using the landscape and the trees specifically to suggest the death and suffering. And he ended up, he ended up being really involved in the Dadaist movement, and he ended up becoming a really abstract painter. And I was very inspired by that trajectory. And so, you know, my book is also about watching these artists who, and this is something I want to talk about, is the entitlement of some of these artists who knew that they were important enough to merit exodus, but also they're not sure what's going to become of them. What does it mean to be painting? In my book, they didn't even have their supplies. And so I really enjoyed looking. I haven't studied art history, but I enjoyed just on a personal level, on a research level, watching how an artist like Paul Nash moved from something like this, which is, it's not realism, but we get it. And then he moved toward just abstract work. And then the last is a sort of a personal photo. I've become friendly with Pegeen Guggenheim's stepson, the son of her first husband, who was a French artist, Jean Hélion. And I was visiting his family recently, and he shared this portrait with me that Pegeen's first husband did of her in 1944. And I just think this is fascinating. I mean, the Pegeen that I was writing about was definitely a troubled young woman, but in my book, she's still young enough that she hadn't developed the sort of mental challenges that would ultimately, well, she killed herself. There's no way to kind of hide that. But I just think this is so interesting how clear-eyed he was about her mentality and sadness. Then ostensibly this is a woman he's in love with, and this is a rough picture, I think. So I will stop sharing and we'll go back. Anyway, a little show and tell, but yeah, that's it had to be there. It just had to be in Correas. It felt right.
The show and tell did lead to one audience question, which is how much research did you do for the book, and what did it look like? How long did it take you to write it?
I'm so glad someone brought up the research question, because I'm dying to hear from Julie on this. So my research, in terms of Correas and what Western Mexico looked like, that's something I've been working on over the past 10 years, because it's a place I've been traveling to quite a bit. I researched for a year about mostly Peggy Guggenheim. She was sort of my point of entry, because there's basically nothing about Pegeen. So the way I got, to start with Peggy, I read her memoirs. I also read the writing. She sort of sponsored a lot of female novelists and female writers like Emily Coleman and Juna Barnes. Leonora Carrington, to a certain extent. Leonora was more known for her art, and also she pretty much took care of herself, total badass. But I read short stories and novels by the women writers that she supported, but mostly I looked at the art because I couldn't find any other way to Pegeen. I started looking at paintings of Max Ernst that Pegeen, who was his stepdaughter? What's wrong with my mind? Stepdaughter.
That's right.
That she's painted into, and then I looked at I found no writing from Pegeen, so I looked at Pegeen's artwork, which it tells quite a bit. And then the way, of course, I researched all the other artists who inspired me. I could have researched the people I was writing about, just like yourself, Julie, were so interesting that I could have gone on forever. So for me, one of the big challenges was to stop researching. I knew I wanted this to be not a slight book, but not a big book, because it is a diary. It's very voicey, and it can be a little bit, I think you ask a lot of a reader to read a giant diary, and then just in terms of, I'm a real show and tell kind of lady. The way that I did it to know what needs to go in the book and what is merely interesting and is something I can share at an event like this or at a dinner party, what really needs to go in the book and what is extraneous was my main challenge. So I had these journals, journals, I don't need to describe my journals to you, but and I filled up maybe 4 journals with just absolutely everything wrote by hand. And then I would take a yellow highlighter and go back and highlight what I thought could be used in the book. And I transposed it to these massive pieces of watercolor paper. I don't know if people could see this. Yeah, it's on both sides. And I had probably 2 of these sheets for the book. And then I would do the same thing I don't know if you can see the yellow highlights. I would yellow highlight what felt the most important, and then I would transpose that to another sheet. And I did that over and over again until I actually memorized everything that I wanted. I didn't set out to memorize it, but it just sort of happened organically. I memorized what I felt needed to be in the book. And so when I sat down to actually write the book as a diary, it felt as if I had lived it. You know, I had that perfect mix of sort of a memorized fact and also a nightmare, like I dreamt it up. And I really felt that I was able to channel her that way. What about you? Your book is stays much truer to what actually happened. And it's also a lot longer than mine. So Julie, how did you handle research?
Yeah, well, I want to ask you a question about just what you said after I answer this question. Let's park the word diary somewhere in the next phase of our questions. Yeah, you know, my novel is narrated from a close third person point of view. And so what I was trying to capture was something like what it would have been like for Varian Fry to actually be there doing that work, told from behind his eyes, as it were, not in a performative first person point of view, like the one that we find in his memoir. I loved reading his memoir. It was amazing to be able to read his account of what happened, but his memoir was filtered in a certain way because it was written in 1945 for an audience that did not yet want to hear about the complications of the United States' role in the war. They wanted the United States to be in a more heroic position.
And are you saying, did he filter it, or was it filtered by some sort of gatekeeper?
Well, he wrote a version that was less filtered, and his editor, in fact, said, we need to remember that your readers are going to want to hear about the heroic role that the United States played.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so I wanted to write a version that was closer to what might have actually been the case in terms of the difficulties that he faced from the State Department in getting visas for his clients and finding ways for them to actually come to this country. And I also wanted to just remain really close to his thoughts as they might have arisen and to the difficulties that he faced day by day. So, you know, it's funny, my first book was a collection of short stories, and a number of those short stories are like 35 pages long. And so I think that my inclination as a writer is toward real-time verisimilitude, which is a little, it's complicated because at the same time, a book cannot replicate life that way. It has to be filtered. That's one of the things we enjoy as we read. We enjoy choice. And that was one of the things I really appreciated about Costalegre, was the way that you focused on certain elements of the experience and returned to them as tropes. And so I wanted to come back to the idea of the diary and think a little bit with you about how that is such an ideal vehicle for the illumination of a 15-year-old girl's mind. It's kind of marvelous that no such diary actually exists and that you got to invent that document. You know, I love novels that are invented documents, you know, that feel like something that we found and that we can sort of voyeuristically enjoy. So I'm curious to know whether those two ideas sort of went hand in hand. Like, did you understand when you knew that your narrator was going to be a 15-year-old that you wanted her to speak through that epistolary voice, or was that something that occurred later in your genesis of the book?
It occurred through, you know, trial and error, just work basically, because originally I started this as a third person. I've never written a book that has multiple narrators in it, and I thought that that would be a nice challenge, but it was too challenging for me.
I hear you, man. That is really hard. I'm in awe of people who can do that
and make the voices sound different. Yeah, I'll try it again. But ultimately, it was also, I mean, the reason I became mildly or pretty obsessed with Pegeen Guggenheim is because there was nothing about her. She was just completely erased. She was erased from her mother's memoirs, you know, more or less. There's just not a lot, you know, her paintings are there, but no one ever talks about her. Even her mother, doesn't necessarily get the respect that she deserves. And so when I tried to write it from other people's point of view, I just thought, well, now I'm just erasing her more. And so then I thought, okay, let me think about the diary. And really what opened it up for me was the decision to make her 15, which I've come to decide is a really, really important age. She was actually 14 for a couple of months. And I remember very specifically calling in fact, the galleys went out when she was 14. And I remember calling my editor and saying, she has to be 15. She has to be 15. In the book, there's a part, she admits she's not menstruating yet. And I thought, not menstruating yet at 14 is not a big deal, but at 15, it's a little more troublesome. But I do think that, I don't have evidence to back this up or articles I can lean on, but I do think that if someone comes in, if you have a difficult, whatever, upbringing, childhood, circumstances in your life, I feel like if someone comes in your life before you reach around 15 years old, who is a mentor or a friend or someone to look up to, I do think that it can be salvatory, is how to word that there can give you hope and like hopefully I'm trying to come up with nautical metaphor. It's not working. A life raft. I don't know, but it can change the path that your life is taking, maybe. Whereas I don't know. I think something happens to women, especially past 15, where perhaps trauma, really difficult things are baked in. I don't know. Again, maybe I shouldn't even be speaking about this because I don't have scientific evidence, but I wanted to meet or introduce a version of this young woman who still had a more kind of hopeful life in front of her, and the diary, and I was nervous in the beginning to tackle World War II. I thought, I don't know, I don't have the chops. I'm not that kind of writer. But then I let myself off the hook when I thought, she's 15. She's going to jump in the diary from time to time and say, oh, we have news finally, and Hitler annexed this country or that country. And then she's going to talk about how much, her mom has hurt her feelings. And that's okay. I would literally say to myself, that's okay, Courtney, because your story is really about this young woman and how much she's dying to be seen by her own mother. It's not about, how she reckons with the war.
Right. And I think that is part of the poignancy of the novel, that in fact, you allow her to be 15 in the context of the war, which is living at a distance, and that's actually one of the advantages, I think, of setting the novel where it is. It is hearsay to her, it's
exactly. And even the information they get can't be verified. No one's bringing them actual newspapers. The only way they can get, they send out, a man, they call him the man, to go to Puerto Vallarta, which takes many, many days. And he comes back and it's just rumors of who saw who at a port. And the other thing that I was able to do with the diary was include illustrations, because this is supposed to be her only friend. She goes over, she doesn't have time to pack up, she's 15. It's not like she has toys. She doesn't have a Nintendo. She doesn't bring any friends. She doesn't have any.
She doesn't have a tutor, which is a really interesting.
She doesn't have a tutor. She doesn't really have schooling.
Right.
She doesn't have Zoom. So she's drawing in the diary, and there's 5 illustrations in here, and that in itself was really an interesting process, because I worked with a wonderful artist and friend named Dasha Zibarova, and in the beginning she sent me a couple illustrations that looked just like Pegeen veiled, true to life what her style was. And it was really cool working with Dasha on fictionalizing on translating the art, like what would the version of Pegeen, what would her art look like if she let herself be a little looser? And it was just a really neat thing. And so all of that kind of playfulness I felt I could get away with in a diary, and I wanted the intimacy that hopefully we get when we read the book.
That's great. Yeah, and I wanted to turn through that medium to what was really the primary news for Lara in the book, which is essentially the weather of her mother's emotions and her mother's feeling toward her. I'm wondering if you can talk specifically about an episode in the book where Lara goes missing for a day and what it's like for her to be missing, where she is, who she's with, and then her return and what it's like for her to see her mother after this disappearance.
So Lara,
was a huge storm and no one knew where she was.
So there's a big storm, and the beach that I showed earlier, if you can picture that blue house and that long beach, her mother is just, no one is paying attention to her, and things are getting a little dicey. The character in the book, who's based on André Breton, you have an amazing scene in your book where André makes them play these games, these kind of dirty parlor games, and he makes everyone tell a truth, like a terrible truth, right? So Breton was always doing these nasty little games. And in the book, they're starting to become more and more uncomfortable and dangerous. There's nudity, there's some sexual stuff involved, and it's just not a great atmosphere. And no one cares except this one person, Jack, who isn't part of the group. He lives far, far away. And so she sort of had enough. And even though she's not a good rider, she goes down, there are these kind of stables, and she goes down and sort of grabs up a horse and has this romantic idea in mind that she's going to gallop to his little house. And then, you know, everyone will be up in arms and come and look for her. And instead, she's thrown halfway through her ride, and someone else who is not related to the group of artists, a local man, finds her, and she says, you know, anyway, he brings her, she spends the night at Jack's. And it's a platonic evening, but it's still quite charged. And so the whole time in her young 15-year-old mind, she's thinking, like, he escorts her home the next day by horse, and she thinks, I'm going to arrive and I've been missed. I'm on a horse, I'm riding my horse well, I'm with this handsome sort of renegade man who everyone's a little bit in love with, but I spend a night at his house. And instead she arrives, and her mother hasn't even noticed that she went missing, because one of the artists is missing, and he's much more important, and everyone has been up in arms about that vacancy, and no one has noticed hers. And I mean, I think it's a pretty heartbreaking kind of point of no return moment for Lara, unfortunately.
And what's so heartbreaking, another layer of heartbreakingness in that scene, is just that she's in love with Jack at that point. You know, like, she has something that's a little beyond a crush. She seems to look at him as a kind of potential savior in a way.
Yeah, yes, 100%.
Both romantically and artistically. And she's just made this argument to him about how much her mother actually cares about her, even though Jack knew her mother earlier and knows that that's probably not true. And so it's not awful. Only does she have to suffer that horrible reckoning with her mother's real neglect of her, but she has to suffer it in front of Jack, which I just think is...
And he's right. And she, like you said, she suffers his sort of rightness. It's just terrible. I feel bad I wrote that. It's just a terrible thing.
But I mean, what you're trying to do is to capture something essential about the relationship between the real Peggy and Pegeen, which was the fact that Peggy had an obsession, and it was not mothering.
No, it absolutely wasn't mothering. And I mean, I came across quotes here and there, you know, reading letters where I get glimpses of exactly what I expected I would find. And one of them was a friend, an Italian artist who was friends with Pegeen, and she was recalling a gondola ride, because it's not like they were estranged. Peggy and Pegeen, they sort of had this codependency and hovered around each other all their lives. And so at a certain point, Pegeen came and lived with her mother when she already had the palazzo in Venice, and apparently she was taking a gondola ride with her girlfriend, whose name I can't recall right now, but and they passed in front of the palazzo, which is now a museum, and Pegeen said, if that place ever goes up in flames, you'll know who did it. And it's funny, like I could have contacted the various Guggenheim museums and asked to have access to letters. I could have gotten closer to the truth than, well, the stated truth than I did, but it was little gems like that I was like, that's all I need. Like that I'm a woman. I've been a 15-year-old girl. I have a difficult relationship with my mother. I gave myself permission to tap into some, universal experiences of mothering, being mothered. It's it can be dark stuff.
Yeah, I really wondered about that as I was reading. I mean, I couldn't help thinking about your own experiences of mothering and being mothered and how that affected the telling. I mean, I like you, I wrote my book over the course of, becoming a mother and, being with my son and daughter as they were going through all the stages of profound need for me, and then growing to a place that was different and where they needed something else from me. And and I thought so much about how you must have been aware of your own mothering as you were writing this book. And I wondered if there were insights that you had into your life as a mother. I really feel like it's actually quite important that we talk about the reality of our family lives as writers and how that affects our work, particularly at this moment where there are so many
I couldn't agree more with you. I think it's really important, and very valuable, actually. It's funny. I have to say, even though ultimately Pegeen is the one I wanted to write about and the one my heart really goes out to, I had a lot of compassion, and still do, for Peggy Guggenheim. I think that woman has not been, I mean, I think she had a lot of negative characteristics. Who doesn't? But she came from a line of very mentally ill people in her family. Her mother, her grandmother. She had a privileged childhood, but a lot of us know that privilege does not always beget happiness and mental wellness. And she was poorly mothered. I mean, I don't want to get into what's a good mother, what's a bad mother. Let's just say that there was some neglect involved. And I don't think she had much of an example. And also, as an artist myself, I really understand and respect the pull and the higher calling of art. I mean, my daughter knows that, I mean, I would say I identify as a writer first. Not a mother, certainly not a wife. It's the great love of my life, writing and reading. And it's also what allows me to kind of have a family. So in terms of my own, I don't know, I went through different mode. I mean, there was a point where I was writing this book where it was like, all I could do was all I could think about. And I just sort of allowed myself that. And I must give a shout out to my husband for supporting me through that kind of intoxicated part of the creativity. And then when it came to kind of buckling down, making it something that wasn't just for me, but for an audience, and you're doing copy edits and developmental edits. And at that point I was involved with, an editor and a publisher. At that point, I was able to start thinking about my own relationship with my little girl. And she had definitely, like you said, I think this question of need is a fascinating one. And she went through, I don't know, when she had like the physical need stuff, the infancy, I was so good at that. It was just this checklist of like, is she too hot? Is she too cold? Is she hungry? Is she tired? Diaper? What? Easy, done. But then the emotional stuff comes in, and there's a neediness for entertainment, which I continue to not fail at, but I'm probably getting like a C+ ish, which is not bad.
No, and especially at the current moment, that's pretty good.
Yeah, but it definitely made me start thinking about when I started trying to research about Pegeen's ongoing depression, I did start thinking a lot about, I need to start showing my daughter that she matters to me, that even if, you know, my agent said something to me on the phone the other day about like something she'd read, that even if you're distracted, you're on a phone call, you're doing, you know, your email, if you can turn to your child with a sparkle in your eye, you know, when your kid enters the room or something, just give them little signals like, it's true, mama's working, but like, you really matter to me. And if you give me 45 minutes, I don't know, I started paying attention to making sure she knows that she matters to me and that I care about her. And yeah, I think it helped me improve. I hope. We should probably bring her in. I'll ask her.
Yeah, well, being seen is such an important thematic element to this book. And one thing that struck me as you were talking about Peggy and her emotional state as the book develops, and what her emotional state would have been in life. I mean, not Peggy, but your analog, Leonora. Her obsession, one of her obsessions seems to be with seeing herself in the artist's work. It's not enough for her to collect them. It's not enough for her to collect their doings, but she wants to be a part of them. And the place where I was most struck by that is the description, your marvelous description of the attiring of the bride, which I wonder if you would read for us. It's on pages, well, in the hardcover, it's pages 100, like the bottom of 104 to the bottom of 105.
Let's see. Okay, so this is based on an actual Max Ernst painting. It's getting awfully dark in this room. I'm gonna get really close, sorry. In the center of the room, though, pinched upon an easel, the thing Mum had brought me in there for, a bridal robing, Mum said, barefoot of feet and smile. Incredible, she continued, with her small hand on her heart. One of his very best. My feet were also bare, and the tile floor was cold. It was early. There were no other footfalls, no voices calling out, just Mother and the cold floor and the terrifying thing. Four figures leaving the chasm of some room, a mirror behind them, the floor, black and white checkers, a serpentine column to the right. On the left, a bird guard, a swan the color of gangrene, with human hands holding a rusted arrow across the bridegroom's groin. And this figure, this bride, a pale and lengthy human, legs endless, breasts pulsing, her face and shoulders covered in a red veil made of feathers, and the widest open eyes, bird eyes, and a bird beak tangled up inside. The cloak fell to the floor around her, the effect of it like something ruined that has been left to decompose, and her nudity inside it. To the bride's right, a lady in waiting, also naked, belly swelling, breasts swelling, her hair half made of eyeballs, facing the opposite direction from the guard. The bride, and then it goes on, and eventually Mother claps. Isn't it fantastical, she swooned. Look how well he's painted me. The legs, just as slim as mine are, and the stomach exceptionally flat.
And she compares herself favorably to her rival, and she's married to this person who she knows doesn't love her, who she knows is in love with somebody else,
who she brought along because she knew he would just be impossible if she didn't bring. The woman is referred to as C, but her name is Charlotte, and she's based on a mixture of Leonora Carrington and Juna Barnes.
Yes, and she has this financial power over him. But she doesn't have the emotional power that she yearns to have. And I felt like that was just so brilliantly captured in this description where this figure that is so both horrific and beautiful embodies her own desire to be recognized. Like, she so badly wants to be the glowing center of Conrad's work. And I just love that. I love the way you really found these conduits to her own desire. I think that we knew what was motivating her, what was driving her, the way that we also knew what was driving Laura, which is so important because they're not being driven toward each other.
I mean, I think it's a really painful question to think about, the relationship between an art patron and the artist, because certainly Peggy Guggenheim was someone who, she's very fond of being photographed in garments and jewelry that had been made for her by artists. Was almost obsessed with being photographed in these things and showing people, you know, it's more than that. We're friends, we're lovers. And that's the other thing. She slept with a lot of the people whose work she supported, men and women. And I mean, she basically admits to this in her memoir, that she just desperately wanted to be liked and loved by these people just for who she was. And of course that was impossible because she was their benefactor.
Right.
And I think that has to be a really uncomfortable place to be. You know, I think she, in my book, at least, I imagined her as someone who wanted to pretend that everyone was hiding out in Mexico with her because she had such gay dinner parties, right? But
right.
that's not the case, of course. That she helped them secure the exit visas and the airplane ride and the boats, and the relationship, of course, between art and money is an incredibly fraught one, and one you write about exceptionally well. I mean, something I've been dying to ask you is you know, how watching Varian Fry struggle with this, is he's you know, thinking to himself in the book, how can I possibly compile a list like this where the people who I leave off the list are going to die, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So how, I mean, did you find yourself ruminating on how you give a value to art, to visual art, and to an artist? Because of course, if you're helping someone get out of a war, about to be war-torn country, the idea or the hope is that they'll continue to produce art, but how do you know they will, right? Because I have to turn on a light. I'm like in total darkness. Hold on.
Well, while you turn on a light, I'll answer your marvelous question. I mean, I think this was a really fraught issue for Varian, who at the outset of his mission was invested in the idea that he had to save the most prominent artists and writers in Europe, the ones whose names would really mean something already to people in the States, and that their work and their presence in the States as products of his life-saving mission would help him then to generate more funds to save others. But only refugees arrive at his hotel room and interviewing them about their experiences and hearing what it had actually been like to live as a refugee for years in some cases, and to feel threatened day by day. I think he realized that his mission was, in a sense, morally bankrupt, and that he could not justify on the basis of the accomplishment that someone had achieved in art, whether or not their lives were worth preserving. And he writes, for example, about certain artists who refused to leave without their male lovers, and how important it was to them to ensure that they left together, and how impossible it was for him to figure out any way to make a case for that to those who would be granting visas. So it was one of the factors that really drove the writing of this book, you know, the evolution of his feeling about that kind of valuation, you know. But I also kept thinking about, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, it got a little,
I can't hear you now.
It got a little choppy. No, but I was going to say that I loved reading about how the Chagalls just like refused to leave. They're like, we're too important. No one's going to come and kill me, you know?
Yeah, I think that was a common problem. I mean, you know, we look at somebody like Irene Nemirovsky, who continued to insist on her literary importance and be an exception when the Nazis looked at the lists of prominent Jews, and yet she died in a concentration camp in 1942, I think it was. You know, there were no exceptions of that kind, and I think that Varian was at pains to convince people at times of the very real danger that they were in.
I don't know whether Sabir is, I see him there. I don't know whether he's jumping in with Q&A questions or not.
Yeah, Sabir, did you have questions that you wanted to float to us?
Yes. Sorry, I had a slight bit of technical difficulties myself and then had to re-log in, so I lost
Okay.
a couple of the questions.
Okay.
But we have a question from Sally on Facebook who wants to know, and I believe you guys touched on this to an extent, but how you balance the act of mothering with the act of writing, and like how that factors into your writing.
Yeah, I feel like we touched on that a little bit. I don't know if you had something to add, Julie.
Well, only to say that especially in the last few months, it's become all the more essential to do it wherever there's a moment of time for it. And for me, that's often right in the middle of the night, like
Oh,
between the hours
really?
of 10 p.m. and 2 or 3 a.m., when I have quiet and solitude. Um, yeah, it continues to feel necessary. Um, and at the same time, it feels like being a parent continues to yield insight for the work in a way that is just invaluable. I mean, both of our books ended up turning on it couldn't have been written without some inner knowledge of what it felt like to love a daughter or to need love as a daughter.
I think
Um,
that's true. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, and I mean, my response is that um, I'm just trying to save up for childcare in whatever form it takes, and also try to do a little parallel work. Like, sweetie, can you paint, and Mama will write, or and then I just had to embrace the screen. Honestly, at this point, she's just watching a lot more cartoons than I would like her to. She plays games on my phone more than I would like her to. But you can't. I don't believe in this balance thing. I know that you can have it all. That I can sit around and come up with craft ideas involving popsicle sticks and also write novels. No, so a lot of Netflix going on.
And then
um,
we do,
Go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead, Samir.
Well, I was going to say, we actually have time for one last question, which I think is sort of perfectly set up by that one. What are you working on next? And is it difficult working during a pandemic?
No, it's really easy. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, just aside from the logistics of most of us not having time, space, and maybe income, it's also emotionally difficult, because there's question marks all over the place. Our loved ones going to fall ill. If they're ill, is it going to get worse? I mean, half of my family's in France. I have no idea when I'll see them again. My mother-in-law just fell down and broke 3 ribs. We can't do anything. So, writing through that it can sometimes feel selfish or unimportant, but I actually don't think that. I think that it is important and necessary. In terms of what I'm working on, um, I have a memoir I just handed in to my agent, so I'm riddled with stress and anxiety.
That's exciting.
It's exciting. Yeah. So I'm waiting to find out what I'll be working on. Hopefully I will be um, editing it, with an actual publisher. If not, I'll be staring at a wall. What about you, Julie?
Um, I'm really excited about your memoir. I can't wait to read it, especially overlaid with your novels. But I've been working on short stories because I had worked on a few short stories over the course of writing my novel. And it was just so refreshing to be talking about it and thinking about it after its publication for the first year. It was such a lovely departure to be in the world of kind of contemporary American, and to be writing these finite narratives that I could then look at as complete smaller pieces, and so so I think that will, there are now 6 stories of this story collection in existence, which is amazing to me because thinking back over the last, even year, I have no idea when I actually wrote these stories, but I think mostly in the middle of the night.
It's amazing. I mean, I just think it's awesome that anyone's getting anything done. And I also think it's okay if you're not. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
In any case, for if there's any writers on the line right now, this isn't the world's best time to query. So, give yourself a break. Agents are just like the rest of us, bundled up in their homes, not having enough space to work. So I think this is a really good time to slow down, deepen our crafts, call into conversations like this, support other writers, buy books.
And perhaps read this book, which is so brilliantly about
So sweet.
what it is like to
And
be,
this one.
to be in a place that you can't escape for a period of time that is unknown to you, and to be alone with your work and your mind and some crazies.
Thank you so am I allowed to give words of thanks right now, Sabir?
Oh, perfect. Go for it. I'm just dropping the order links in the chat for your books.
Oh, as
Hooray.
I fall into darkness here. Yeah, no, I mean, touching on what we were just saying, anyone who's here right now who took the time to call in, even if you're eating in front of your screen, you're drinking, not drinking, whatever you're doing, I think that we're all doing our best, and I'm just proud of us for all doing our best. I think it's amazing that Sabir is here. We were talking on the phone 2 nights ago, and he's sweating in his apartment. Julie and I are both in homes that don't belong to us right now. Julie, we have friends in common, but I was a stranger to her, and she stepped up to do this, have this conversation with me tonight. And I think these acts of generosity are what is going to see us through. And I feel very grateful and appreciative for everyone who's here tonight. And thank you so much, Julie, Sabir, and the Strand. Thank you.
Such a pleasure. And it was just an honor and a delight to get to talk to you about this beautiful book.
Thank you so much.
And then I'll add a final round of thanks. Thank you both for a fantastic, fascinating, and interesting event. And I thoroughly recommend both of their books. I try and read as many event books as I can, and that's not always the case, but I was able to tear through Julie's book last year and yours this past week, and I've just adored both of them.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Sabir.
Thank you both, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry about the seagull. He's gone.
He got the chicken he needed, and now he's off.
He did. I really, though, it was a tremendous seagull. Otherwise, I wouldn't. It truly large. But thanks to the seagull, I forgot to thank him. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.